All right, so today we'll be talking about green municipal aggregation. My name is Daria Mark, and I work for a nonprofit called Green Energy Consumers Alliance. So we'll talk about four things today: Green Energy Consumers Alliance and our involvement in green municipal aggregation, where we are in green municipal aggregation in Massachusetts, the types of aggregation programs that we support, and the next steps for changing Southcoast aggregations to be green aggregation programs. Green Energy Consumers Alliance, we're a nonprofit, we're in JP, and we use the power of energy consumers to bring about a transition to a low carbon future. So we have programs for driving, we have programs for electric driving, electric heating and cooling, and then we do a lot of work on energy, and electricity, which is why we're here today. So municipal aggregation has been allowed in Massachusetts since 1997, and the Cape Light Compact took advantage of it then, and a lot of other towns have taken advantage of it since. And it's a mechanism by which a city or town buys electricity in bulk for residents and small businesses. So it's kind of like Costco. If you buy something one at a time, it costs you more per unit. If you go to Costco and you buy, and I just, for full disclosure, do not work for Costco, but the concept works really well. It's, you go and you buy in bulk, the price per unit is smaller. Aggregation is the same way. You can decide that you're going to buy electricity for a lot of people all at once, then you can see a savings. We've seen savings in all the communities that we've supported on an aggregate level. So maybe not in every 6-month period, but as you know, most aggregation programs are 2 years, 3 years, and so over the time of that, there's good evidence so far that you'll see some savings. Basic service customers who are part of that municipality that's doing this work are automatically enrolled, which is what the strength of the aggregation programs is, because it's an opt-out. You can opt out at any time. There's no penalty. The plans for aggregations are vetted through the Department of Public Utilities, and sometimes we call aggregation programs municipal aggregation, and sometimes they're referred to as community choice aggregation or CCA. So you'll see all those terms interchangeably. And on the right side, I included a general mix of our I believe this is the last year's or the year before that, the mix of electricities we have now. And so you can see natural gas and oil and coal. There's a lot of fossil fuel based electricity in our mix. And we need to grow the pie chart that is the renewable portion, and that's where aggregation is really powerful. So green municipal aggregation, the mechanism is the same, but when you go out and you decide what kind of electricity you want for your town, you add renewable sources. So most communities start at 5%. It seems like a nice, palpable number for a community to start with. Cape Light Compact, when they started, they did 1%. Other communities have gone as far as 30%. Brookline is now, and Newton went to 46%. So there's really a lot of difference, and you as a community decide how much green you want to have. So the communities that are in the South Coast right now that are doing aggregation with good energy have 0 additional renewable content in their electricity mix. And to make it a green municipal aggregation, we would add 1%, 5%, 10%, whatever each community decides is the right number for them. So that's the difference between just regular municipal aggregation and green municipal aggregation. So the municipal aggregation programs, and the green ones specifically, are set up in this way. Everybody starts in the bottom left-hand corner in the utility basic service. And then when the municipal aggregation program starts, you go to the green circle on the right. Almost everyone winds up on the default percentage. That's where the default percentage, and the fact that this is an opt-out program, is really powerful, because you get, even if it's 5%, it's 5% for every resident in the town. And so you get the numbers just from the scale. Within the aggregation program, there is an opportunity to go to zero, which is not zero renewable electricity, it's just 0% above what the state law requires, but it still will get you a better price most often than the utilities basic service. But then there's also a really powerful tool where you can opt up to 100%. That means in the green aggregation program, when prompted, people can go and sign up for their specific household to go to 100%. There's also competitive suppliers, and Clean Choice Energy, I think, is one. And so they do all this marketing, and people can opt in and opt out of the green aggregation program to a competitive supplier if they choose to. But this is how the green municipal aggregation programs are structured. So right now, what is set up in the Southcoast is that your default green bubble does not have default additional. It's kind of empty. And most communities have that upped up to 100%. So we started green municipal aggregation in 2015. Good Energy came to us and asked us to green their program. So we put the green back in the green municipal aggregation. And we developed the green municipal aggregation model and started in 2016 with Melrose and Dedham, who both added 5% at the time. Now we've grown to 13 communities, and almost half of them are in their second contract, and Melrose is in their third with us. So there's a lot of moving parts here as far as how energy is delivered for the municipal aggregations. And I wanted to give this overview of how does Good Energy tie into this? How do we tie into this? And how do all the players connect? So the community, that's all the way on the right side. And actually, this is people mostly read graphics left to right, but let's read this one right to left. So the community is who makes the decision that we want to add green electricity to our electricity mix. And then, you already have an approved aggregation, but towns who don't, they would pass either town meeting or get a city council vote to say, yes, our community can do aggregation. You find an energy broker. So that's bottom left, that's Good Energy. So they're an energy broker and the town has a contract with them. And the energy broker then starts the process for aggregation or green aggregation. In either case, it's the same. They go out and they get competitive suppliers to bid on your municipal aggregation's load. And they stipulate as part of this process that the renewable energy certificates that are needed are needed to make renewable electricity purchases, which is how we buy renewable electricity in Massachusetts, come from Green Energy Consumers Alliance. So that's us. So we provide the green portion of the aggregation programs. And the competitive supplier also goes out and they get the physical electricity. And they also get the renewable energy certificates that are required to meet the state standard. So basically the competitive supplier does the part that Eversource would do, or NSTAR would do, National Grid would do, where they provide the physical electricity and they meet the state standard. And then we provide the green portion that is above and beyond that. And we look for local contracts. We look for developers who want to build wind or solar in Massachusetts. There's a little bit of hydro coming online. So those kind of projects that need our support and need this renewable energy certificates to make their business model viable in Massachusetts and in New England, where it's really expensive to build renewable energy. We use this mechanism through green municipal aggregation to bring those projects online. And at the end, it winds up changing the electrical grid in Massachusetts, which is the whole point of this exercise, is we want to start generating electricity in a different way. We don't want to generate with natural gas, and that's the fuel that will be displaced when we bring on renewables. All right, so we talked about us, Green Energy Consumers Alliance, we talked about green municipal aggregation. So now we'll talk about what's going on in Massachusetts with green municipal aggregations. So you can see this map. We started this map about 2 years ago, and we updated as we learned that each town changes how they source their electricity. The dark brown are spots that towns have done aggregation, but they have not added any renewable content at all above what the state requires, nor do they even have an opt-up renewable option. Light brown towns, which is most of the South Coast, those towns have aggregation programs. They're not adding anything by default, but they have an opt-up option for people to go 100% renewable within their aggregation. And then there's different shades of green. The lightest shade, which is the Cape Lake Compact, they add 1%. And then you get a lot of towns in that next shade up is the 5%, which is where a lot of the communities start, as I mentioned. The big green dot right in the center is Worcester. They just are in the process. They were just approved by the Department of Public Utilities. They're adding 20%, they said, a 20% local renewable electricity at least to their mix, which is really exciting to hear because they have a big population and a lot of accounts. The darker green dots, that's Brookline and Newton, they both have above 30% or above. There's Acton at 10%. Arlington went to 11% this year. So we'll talk about, so you can see from the map that, you know, in 2016, when we started the green municipal aggregation concept, this map had lots of brown, lots of light brown, and two green dots of Dedham and Melrose. And you know, in 4 years, this has changed substantially. A lot of the communities that are in light blue are in the process to aggregation. That means they've either have a warrant article in town meeting or have a resolution in front of their city council, or they're already in the Department of Public Utilities and they're going through the process of aggregation, or they've been approved by the Department of Public Utilities and now they need to go out and get bids for their energy and decide on the level of renewables that they're able to source. So there's a lot of changes.
Sorry, can I interrupt you for just one moment? So that whole light brown area on the South Coast, it's actually misleading because it's only Dedham out of those 23 towns that has the opt-up option. The other 22 towns do not have an opt-up option. So that's really important to understand when we're going forward with our region.
Okay, that we will have to update the map on that. Let me thank you for pointing that out. We will check. Okay, let's keep going. So that's our Massachusetts map. Now let's talk about the kinds of aggregation programs that are out there. So we support 13 different programs. Most are between 2 and 3 years. That seems to be the sweet spot for getting a good price on energy and a stable price on energy. And so, you know, when Good Energy works with your municipalities to renew their contract, that's going to be where they go. And so you can also estimate that's, you know, if you're thinking about advocacy and timing and such, about the year before the contract renews is when you want to start talking to decision makers about the kind of choices that you would like for them to make, right? So adding green content to aggregation, that discussion should happen now. The South Coast communities are about just under a year away from the end of this current aggregation contract. So now is the right time to start putting a bug in everyone's ear to say, hey, but what about renewable content? Can we add renewable content? How much renewable content we can add? We find that it takes about, and I don't think this is specific to clean electricity at all. I think it's specific to kind of changing people's minds or getting people on the same board where you are, is that it takes about 3 times when someone hears something before they, you know, agree with you or think that what you might be presenting is a good idea. And so having those polite and persistent conversations is really key in getting people to shift from where they are. You can also see the percentages. As I mentioned, Arlington is at 11%. They started at 5% with their first aggregation contract, and then they just renewed for their second. They were planning for another 5, so they were thinking about going to 10. And then when they saw the prices and they felt they could make a bigger impact, they went to 11%. They felt like they could, with the contract that they, with the bids that they received, they felt like they could go to 11%. That's additional 11% renewable electricity, which means Arlington is now at 31% total. The state is at 20% as of 2020. So Bedford just started their program. Brookline started with 25% and went to 30 this past year. Dedham has been going strong with theirs program at 5%. Gloucester just started at 5%, and Hamilton just started at 5%. And then the rest of the communities, we have Medford, Melrose in their third contract already. Rockland just started. Somerville went from 5% to 10%. Somerville also purchased renewable energy certificates for their municipal load. So even though we call municipal aggregation, even though we call this aggregation green municipal aggregation, it is not municipal electricity that we're talking about. We're talking about residents and small businesses. So there's also a consideration of like, well, how do we power, our schools and our town hall? And so Somerville thought about that and added a little bit of renewable energy certificates to offset some of their load. We have Stoneham, Sudbury, and Winchester just renewed theirs. That's their second contract, and they increased also to 10%. So there's room for growth. You start at 5%, you can change as the contracts turn over. So there's another view. I'd mentioned that there's potential for savings because this is our second round in a lot of these towns. We were able to see the savings that were achieved. So you could see even Brookline, which started with such an aggressive 25% additionality, over the course of the 2.5-year contract, still saw some savings. Now, it's not as much as some of the other towns, even though we have a bigger load than some of the other towns, but we were able to see savings at because the basic service rates that Eversource provides are variant, and Eversource does not have control over when they go out to bid for their rates. They're required by the Department of Public Utilities to go at about the same time twice a year. Whereas for aggregation programs, the beauty of aggregation programs is that the energy broker, if they are qualified and they're good, which Good Energy has so far been very good, works very hard to understand the energy prices and then suggest to the towns the right time to go out to bid. And so getting that right timing is key to seeing some stability in some good prices and some stability in your prices. Here's another view. I think it's really helpful to understand kind of how even adding 5% will still keep the savings that aggregation brings in general. This is Winchester. I just mentioned they started their second aggregation program, and they added 5% and then went to 10%. You can see that the orange line, which is the basic service price from NSTAR and Eversource, fluctuates every 6 months, and sometimes it's a little bit less than the aggregation price, but most of the time it's a lot more. And so in aggregate, that's why we're seeing savings, because there's great stability with aggregation programs, and even with renewable content, you are still getting a savings. Winchester was still getting a savings in the aggregation, and will continue most likely for at least for the next 6 months. We don't know what will happen after that, but you can see by this trajectory that it's a very powerful program. This is an overview of the places where we look for our renewable energy certificates. We work very hard to support projects that are local, that are in Massachusetts. There's lots of research that shows that building renewables in your community improves, job prospects, and but the biggest thing that this does, and the reason we don't go outside of New England, is because our electricity grid cannot change if we are sourcing projects from outside New England. I'll explain a little bit about that. So GMA, the way we buy the green portion of the of the electricity mix is creates additionality, which means the more we buy, the more renewables that are built. But that only works if we buy what is called a Class 1 renewable energy certificate. And national or Class 2 renewable energy certificates don't provide the same additionality. They're resources that will be built with or without your dollars, and it's really important for us to change our electricity grid by putting our dollars where it will make a difference. And you can see that here a little bit in a more cost perspective. So on the left, two projects. On the left side, the two projects are, one is a old New England hydro project. So the old hydro projects, because of their capacity and because of the fact that they've been built a while ago, they are able to generate their to cover their cost and their loan payments or whatever cost is incurred with the revenue that they get from generating electricity. And so if you add renewable energy certificates, which is the light green bar on top, you're just adding to profit. You're not incentivizing the development of more hydro projects. The second one is a non-New England wind project. So there's a lot of conversation, why aren't we buying Texas wind or South Carolina wind or wind from other states? So it's the same scenario. Their cost and incurred to build the turbine is such that by the time that they are creating the electricity for it, the electricity markets, in the markets where they are, they can make their money back on the electricity sales. And then the incentives that are available, et cetera. So they don't need that tiny sliver of renewable energy certificates for us to give them. So anybody who, you sometimes will see some aggregations have said that they are 100% renewable. And if you look very carefully at that, what they're doing is they're buying national renewable energy certificates. We have read a lot of research that does not create the same additionality that we need in New England. If you're buying national renewable energy certificates, it does not change the development of energy in New England. And so we believe that the importance of aggregation programs and the green aggregate part of the aggregation programs is to build additionality in New England and to build more resources in New England where our electric grid resides. And so you can see that on the last two columns. So the cost to develop wind project in New England is much higher than it is nationally because we just don't have the scale. We do not have a place where we can, unless you're talking offshore wind, but so far we've not had the place where you can put a 300 turbine project and claim the scale benefits of that. Again, going back to the Costco, it's funny to think about buying wind turbines at Costco, but that's the same model, is that if you're buying one at a time, they're more expensive, and if you're buying a lot more and installing them all together, that per unit they become cheaper. Our land is also extremely expensive, and so when the project is then generating electricity, the electricity sales are not enough for it to cover the cost of development. And if the electricity sales were kind of left by themselves, we would not get the development of the wind projects that we need. And so that's why we need the renewable energy certificates to add that pie chart at the top, to add that piece of the pie at the top, to bring it above the cost of what it takes to develop the wind, and therefore create a market for more wind development. And so that's where, we have at Green Energy Consumers, we have an individual buy program for a renewable energy certificate. We now do the green aggregation, as we're talking about here. And all of that revenue goes to bringing more renewable energy projects online in the New England grid, where we need to make the difference. So those were my slides. So I wanted to share some next steps with you. If you're in a Southcoast community that's already doing the aggregation, you already have approval to have your aggregation. So you don't need to go to town meeting and you don't need to go to your city council to get approval for aggregation. That's already done. But you need to get buy-in from decision makers to green your municipal aggregation. So, green energy consumers can't convince, can't pull any levers, and good energy is also not the decision maker on how much green electricity a city or a town will do. The decision makers are in the municipalities. It's whoever is in charge, and it varies depending on size and government structure in a town. But the person who's in charge of the aggregation program is the decision maker on do you add green or not. So getting their buy-in is your step one. Then you create a green aggregation plan, share it with the community. And then Good Energy does the procure electricity with the additional renewable energy. You launch the program. Most people, it will be just like the previous program they launched, and they will not notice, but you can monitor the program for participation and market the opt-up 100%, which comes with every green aggregation that we do. There's always a choice to go, so if your default is 5%, there's always a choice to go up to 100% or to go back down to 0. So I wanted to share, Nicole shared with me that there's a coalition already working on the green portion of the, Nicole, do you want to chime in here?
Sure, that'd be great. Yes, we've been talking through email and different social media outlets, but please get a hold of me if you would like to work on this in terms of, making sure that we have a simple message, making sure that we are giving you resources in terms of who to speak to, how to say it, what to ask for as a group, and some other pushes that we'll be doing in the next couple of months. So I don't know if you have my email, but I would love to hear from you, and I can get you on our email list. And it looks like we'll be doing things remotely for the next couple of months. Great, there it is. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Now I'll look through and see. Let's see. Jamie asked, given our size, oh my gosh, I just lost your comment. Given our size, we could really be moving the market to create new renewable resources that would displace things like coal. That's very true. Coal is shrinking fast. We don't, in New England especially, it's still such a prevalent source in the rest of the country, but in New England, we're thankfully pushing out coal really quickly because of the cap and trade program we have on the electricity generation. The place where we are not making enough progress is natural gas, and that's kind of our next frontier, is to push natural gas out of the electricity generation.
Daria, Jamie had asked that question in regards to when you were showing the chart about making sure that it's class 1 RECs versus wind elsewhere in the country. I think, and I know, Jamie, you can correct me, but we've talked about this before. Jamie also thinks that there's room potentially for credits because of our huge size of 23 towns, credits elsewhere besides New England. Could you speak to that? And I think his point was that, we're so huge that we still may have enough demand elsewhere to actually move that, as to how things are generated in terms of energy.
Yeah, so that question comes up a lot. What's the point of us buying RECs here if they're so much cheaper elsewhere? We can get so many more RECs for our dollar, and there's a lot of different, people are thinking a lot about energy, which is really great. And here's how we look at it. If you go to a place that has cheap land, a lot of available wind, and build an energy project there, that energy project, that renewable project, will likely be cash positive as it's built. So it will not need renewable energy certificates from your aggregations to make it happen. If you don't invest in it, somebody else will invest in it. There are developers whose sole purpose is to look for wind potential places and solar potential places where they can put projects and make good money on it. And that's already happening. That transition is happening elsewhere in the country. And you are correct that when it's happening in the rest of the country, a lot of the places where it's happening, it's pushing coal out of the grid, which is really great. And we want that to keep going. We are focused on the New England grid. If the Southcoast aggregations don't invest in the New England grid and then take their money elsewhere, New England grid does not change. We still will feel the pressure to build more natural gas power plants, and we will still have natural gas in our electric mix. You know, we have some hydro, we have some nuclear. How long that nuclear will stay is a big question. And then what is that going to be replaced with when it stops is going to be more natural gas. And so we feel that in order to make the change that we need in the New England region, we absolutely have to invest in projects that are in New England. So even if that means, look, you could go 100% with national RECs tomorrow, or you could go 2% with New England Class 1 RECs now, the New England Class 1 RECs will have more impact because they will be for projects that will not get built if you do not support them. And that's kind of the reality of our energy grid. If that does not answer your question, Jimmy, feel free to add some more at the bottom. Let's see.
I think my issue, sorry if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the bigger issue for me is, you know, when it comes to greenhouse gases, the planet doesn't care where they're being generated. So if we've got a greater opportunity to displace coal more quickly, that seems like a bigger planetary win.
Yeah, so I think the key part of your statement right there is more quickly. Sometimes it feels like, well, if we put our muscle behind the projects, they'll get built more quickly. But it's not what we see. Developers are self-incentivized by the price tag to build renewables if they're building them in places where they're cash positive. So they are working, the holdup is not interest, the holdup is regulation, land, sizing, engineering design, all those things. The holdup in New England is all those things, plus the fact that projects here cannot survive without renewable energy certificates and without a healthy renewable energy market. So it is very, very tempting. I totally understand. It is very tempting to displace coal, but the question is that really feasible from the input of Southcoast communities to go and make any change in coal at all, or will you investing even a small percentage in our renewable energy certificates here, because they are more expensive, will that displace our natural gas and quicker? And there's been a big fight about getting more natural gas capacity here, because we use natural gas both for electricity generation and a lot of people use it for heating. And the more support we can take from natural gas in the region, the harder it becomes for anyone to make a case that we either need to build a new pipeline or that we need to build a new power plant that runs on natural gas. And no one builds a power plant for 5 years, and no one builds a pipeline for 5 years. So that's where, that's the reality of our region.
Okay, I understand that. I know that there are several campuses nationally that have looked at that issue and just gone a different direction in terms of trying to aggregate their use to get rid of coal.
Yeah.
But I understand where you're coming from.
Yep.
Second tangent question then is, in your crystal ball, where are we at with the federal government and offshore wind?
I really wish, I got to look up on Amazon if I can order that crystal ball. That'd be so great. They are not moving quickly. Projects that were slated 2022 to 2023 are now looking more like 2023, 2024. So it's the offshore wind question is very frustrating because we have such great potential. We have, by some estimates, something like 8,000 megawatts of potential on offshore wind just in Massachusetts, right? And there's now, if you look at, we have greenenergyconsumersalliance.org on our blog. We just last month published a list of where the energy prices are coming in from wind, from offshore wind, with a list of the offshore wind projects that are going up and down the eastern seaboard. And it's like Maryland, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. I think even New Hampshire has a project slated. And so there's very clearly a lot of interest. There's very clearly a lot of potential, and there's very clearly a lot of opposition because or stalling, I guess I'll call it, from the federal government, because it displaces things like natural gas and coal. So, the situation with the federal government is extremely upsetting, and I don't know that we can do anything about it right now as advocates. What we can do, though, is we can support the development of more renewables in places where we can control it, right? The federal government can't tell us not to put a wind turbine in Scituate. They just can't. So those are decisions where we as advocates can choose to use our energy. And the beauty of green municipal aggregation is that, unlike purchases, we as a nonprofit, we do a lot of individual actions, and so we have people who've signed up for individual, Green My House 100% green accounts with New England Recs. The beauty of green municipal aggregation is that you have much more heft, and so when you're adding that heft to the renewables market in New England, that puts a lot of pressure on developers. The kind of pressure we want, right? The kind of positive pressure we want to build in New England. Pressure and support, I guess I should say. So while we wait for offshore wind, the best thing we can do is support more onshore development, because we need them both. There's no way we can't get where we need to go by only offshore wind. We need an energy efficiency, but we also need resources that are onshore. And we can, remember that, we don't, once a community goes to green municipal aggregation, we don't chisel in stone the source of your renewable energy certificates. We buy to the load that your community needs, and we buy it from the region, from New England, and we try to look for Massachusetts from where it's available. But if, opportunities come from different places, and so if the next round of aggregation, so if you were in 2020, in 3 years even, it still might not look like, if you in 2021 start with a green portion, by the time you're ready for your next portion, maybe there'll be offshore wind, but maybe there won't. And most likely it's looking like there won't be. So because even if it is built in 2024, the utilities have first dibs on it based on the way our law is written for the offshore wind. So in order to bring more renewables online as fast as possible, the place to invest is in the New England region, in Massachusetts, and to do it is through aggregation is a really powerful way. I hope that answers your question. So there was
David Rosenberg had a couple of questions. His first one was, can other towns join this Southcoast aggregation, and if so, how?
Yeah, so the process for another town to join is as I said before, your town, if it's a town, its town meeting you write a warrant article, and I have some sample warrant articles if you would like. You write a warrant article, it passes town meeting, and then the town administrators and municipal decision makers, depending on what your staff is, goes out, gets an energy broker such as Good Energy, and then the energy broker writes a plan. They submit it to the Department of Public Utilities. So if the town that you're thinking about has not done those steps, has not approved it through town meeting or city council vote if you're a city, and or has not hired an energy broker, and that energy broker has not submitted the plan to the Department of Public Utilities, and the Department of Public Utilities has not approved your plan, those are absolute requirements before you can join any kind of the next aggregation. The South Shore aggregation is interesting in that actually the towns are kind of individual entities, but because they're on the same time cycle together, they get more interest from large energy buyers. And so they get more interest, they get more competition in rates, which is what we want to see, right? We want to see competition brings down the prices and we want the best rates. So you know, joining is kind of a loose term where you're basically aligning timing. And so if you're interested in exploring more, I'd be happy to talk to you offline and kind of go through, and if you want to share the community you're thinking about, we can look up if they have, some communities have aggregation plans that are either a dark brown or a brown where they're not adding renewables, and so those can be converted to a green with a little bit easier process. So we can take that conversation further. So there's a second question here about how community aggregation relates to solar projects. So let's see, 50%. So I don't know the mechanics of the specific solar project you're talking about and how you know, the discounts and such. But let me answer this in a general way. So a lot of people have solar for like on their house through the SMART program, and they have the Eversource pays them back and all the things. So those things are entities that are independent of each other. So the green aggregation, just like the other aggregation, the non-green portion, works only on the part of the electricity that you have to pay to the part of your electricity cost that you have to pay to, you know, before it was your utility, now it'll be an energy supplier. So whatever electricity you have that's left that has to be paid with a rate, the rate on that will change because aggregation often brings a lower rate, and it will not affect any kind of solar incentives that the house has. Now, I don't know how it works with community solar projects, so I can check, but my guess would be that it actually, if it's giving you a discount, we have to check how it would compare. But if it gives you a 15% deduction on your use, right, then that's, again, it's whatever's left that would be aggregated. Jamie asked if we have a list of decision makers in each town. So that's a Nicole question, and Nicole, we're working with you on that.
Yes, so we've been putting that together, and the next steps will be connecting residents in those towns to those people. Perfect. So I'll definitely need your help, Jamie, and everyone else's in terms of mapping, you know, contacting interested residents, or for them then to contact their decision makers. And a lot of towns already have like green committees, so also contacting them, putting the bug in their ear as well. So that's definitely part of what we'll be doing next in terms of organizing. Thanks, Jamie.
Great. Nicole, you have a question here at the end. Could we do a combination of both New England clean energy? Did you still want me to answer that, or do you feel like that's been answered, the clean energy and the wind solar elsewhere?
Is that even a possibility, I suppose?
Yeah, so Lexington does this. They have something like, I want to say it's 10% above what the state requires in New England clean recs, and then they have, the rest is filled with national recs. So we don't do aggregations that way because it is extremely difficult. You know, aggregation in itself is hard to explain to the community and everybody and get buy-in on. Hey, we're going to do this electricity thing and we're going to add 5% to it. That is a simple concept, right? But, you know, you're still going to have some iterations of explaining to people where, you know, what's the 5% and who's the 5%, et cetera. So when you then tack on to that, well, there's also these national renewable energy certificates, and we're buying those, and then so now we're 100%. You know, what value are you gaining from that? Because you're not, so if you're buying 60% of your aggregation, whatever's left after you've added your renewable percentage, if you're buying the rest of that in national recs, you're not changing what's happening nationally. I already talked about that, and I think we've covered it. So, if instead you could take that money and get an extra 1% onto your aggregation program, then you're first of all keeping it in the region and changing what's in the region and changing our grid. And you're second of all keeping a very clear delineation between what is additionality, what changes the grid, and what is not impactful, right? Jamie had talked about some places that go, some campuses that go nationally and do projects. What they're doing is they're basically kind of pairing with a developer to build turbines elsewhere, which developers already do, right? So, how much of that would not get done if MIT did not go to a developer and say, we want to build in South Carolina? MIT cannot get physical electrons from there. So even, so that project is going to get built and South Carolina's grid is going to look great. Or maybe it's, I'm sorry, I apologize, maybe it's North Carolina. Their grid is going to look better because they just put up a 100 megawatt wind farm, but that does not change our grid, right? So we are still stuck where we are. So, to keep aggregation with the additionality that it brings, to keep the conversation consistent and clean about how we purchase renewable energy certificates and why we have to purchase in New England, we feel that it is very, very misleading to say we have 100%, we have 100% clean aggregation, whereas the town next to you only has 5%, and then they're like, wait a minute, how come we only have 5? How could they do 100%? And then you start having these misconceptions because you don't want to lead people to buy 100% renewable sources from elsewhere where there is no impact to the electric grid, because at the very end, we still have to have electrons from the New England grid that flow here. Yes, Dedham has 5%. Jamie's question, Dedham has 5% additional. I didn't realize they were part of the Southcoast, but Nicole is definitely the expert on that. Did anyone else know that they had the option to do this? Yeah, so that's also a Nicole question. I'm not sure how many communities knew that they could, that they as an individual community could decide to get 10%, 15%, 5%, whatever the community is ready for. But I double checked with Larry, who's my boss and an absolute expert on this and aggregation and such. I double checked with him actually twice to make sure that this is absolutely possible, that different communities in this, it's a group buy-in. So it's not each group, each piece of the group buy-in can decide their own green percentage. All right, we are coming up on 5 minutes before our end. Any other questions? Anything I didn't cover that you wanted me to cover? And if you would like to ask me more questions, please post in the chat and I can reach back to you about aggregation, the mechanics of aggregation. And then if you have questions that are specific to Southcoast green electricity effort, then the outreach is to Nicole, and it's nicole@reliance.org is the email address.